simplify, simplify, simplify. The best ideas, the most powerful ideas are like really simple and very straightforward.
Alrighty, hello everyone, and welcome to the Deal Maker Show. So today the guest is, for me, it kind of like brought me through memory lane because he went through a similar journey. He's also a recovering lawyer, just like myself, but really a spectacular journey, and what they're doing is remarkable. They actually were quite ahead of their time, but they were able to ultimately, ride the wave, and now, they're doing great stuff. So I guess really brace yourself for an inspiring conversation. We're going to be talking about his upbringings, being in a very competitive and intense, type of environment, there in the Czech Republic. Also, how he met his co-founder, how they went about building, how they went about raising, as well as also, their first customers and how they achieve product market fit. So again, amazing conversation in front of us. And without further ado, let's welcome our guest today, Andrew Antos. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Alejandro. I'm super excited to be here.
Well, born and raised in the Czech Republic. Give us a walk through memory lane. How was life growing up over there?
Yeah, that's right. So I was born 1 year before the communism kind of regime ended, and I grew up mostly in most of my family for the last 4 generations have been like scientists. My mom is a mathematician. My grandfather was a chemist, and so on. And so I kind of grew up in that environment, and especially in the 90s, right? So capitalism, took a foothold. I was just very fascinated by that, and just grew up in this like super intense, super competitive environment. And you really like kind of like started there. I think like those were the years that really shaped me, like the late 90s, the early 2000s, and just this kind of like constant like push to excellence, right? So for example, like my mom never got anything other than like an A in every school all the way through, like her PhD and like postdoc and so on. So in that like super intense environment. And so there was just a lot of stories of just like, wherever, like if I would get like a B, it would be like a complete disaster, right? It's like, I remember once I said like, okay, well, I got an A from something. And my mom's reaction was like, well, so you're resting on your laurels, right? And so it was like that kind of an environment. And for some reason, at the end of high school, I decided to become a lawyer, right? So like similar story as you, because I felt like, well, if I understand technology well, I taught myself how to do like simple programming in high school and so on. If I understand technology really well, that's going to be really good, because most lawyers are super bad with technology. And so went through undergrad and focused on everything like technology related. And then I decided to join a US-based law firm to basically do like tech M&A and regulatory matters. And immediately, like within like a year, I basically realized that like I can't be a lawyer. I don't want to be a lawyer. It's like
Well, why? Why? What was that moment where you're like, man, this is not for me?
It's that like you're not creating independent value. You're selling your time for money. That was like one really big component. And it just felt like so not creative, right? There are these occasional moments of like where you come up with something new, but like 99% of the time you're searching for something that somebody has already done, and you're just like doing it again. And it just felt like the combination of like you're not creating some independent value in the world, and this kind of just constant like remixing of stuff just felt so not inspiring to me.
But I'm sure that at least you were able to learn quite a bit when it comes to M&A, structuring deals. Like, what was there for you when it came to? Because I find that being part of a hyper growth company and leading it, I think that really being able to understand and anticipate problems, and structuring deals, I think it gives you a nice edge. So I think that from that perspective, what was your biggest takeaway from the lawyer years?
Well, so you're absolutely right? Like you're starting from like a third base on a lot of these things, right? So you already understand like how does a corporation work, and how do you sell, how do you issue stock and get an investment, and like how do you do like equity grants and all of that stuff, right? But that's actually not the heart of the company. You still have huge amounts of companies that are super successful if they find really strong product market fit, even though the founders originally know nothing about this, right? So it's a nice to have, but I don't think it's a must have. I actually think the number one thing that I've learned there is like communication, especially written communication. So just getting really good at like writing emails. I know that sounds funny in the world of LLMs, but just being able to like write really good emails to get like your first customers when you're like reaching out cold, and like being very succinct and being able to articulate value really well. I think those were like the biggest learnings that I got there.
So here you are in Europe, working at a law firm. The whole idea of doing your master's and coming to Harvard, how did that idea come knocking, and tell us about why you thought the timing was right at that point to do that.
Yeah, so I think there were two things. The first one was, so I already mentioned kind of like growing up in that scientific family. And so I had a lot of like my relatives start like invented something or started something, but because this all happened in the kind of like dark ages in communism, it was taken away from them. So for example, like one of my great aunts co-invented the soft contact lens that people use, and like she got a little plaque and she hasn't seen a single penny out of it. And so I felt like if I want to build a business, I want to build it in a place where that you have a lot of stability and longevity, right, as well as a large market. So that was like, that was the US. And then the second part of it was, okay, I need to figure out a way how to create some like mind space, right? Because I was working 100-hour weeks at the law firm, so I need to create some like mind space to actually do that. So came to the US to do my master's at Harvard. And the first thing that I've done was to cross-register for a startup course at MIT, a course called 15390 New Enterprises. And so I cross-registered for the course. It's the third week I'm in the US, and I meet this guy in class. His name is Nishal, and we hit it off instantly. And he's just finishing up his undergrad at MIT, computer science undergrad, focused on machine learning and natural language processing. And we just hit it off, and we're like, okay, well, let's pair up for this class. And then we talk more and more, and then we're like, well, we should actually think about like after we graduate, like let's start a real company together. And so we meet up again after class. We spend like 3+ hours walking around Cambridge, and we decided to build an AI company then. And the reason why we felt like we have to do it then is like we felt like AI is happening, and it's happening without us in September 2016, because like the environment at MIT was, people were sleeping overnight in front of like professor offices to sign up for machine learning classes, right? They were all sold out. And so there was that kind of like an environment. And so we like took what we saw and we extrapolated it for the whole world. And we're like, clearly this is happening everywhere. And that, obviously wasn't the case.
So then tell us about what happened next.
Yeah. So we work on this as a school project, right? First. And so our first idea was like, okay, can we apply AI to the legal profession, right? Can we automate due diligence? Can we automate all of these different kind of like use cases around AI for legal? And so we work on it as a class project for a year, and then we graduate. And then in 2017, in the summer, we formally started as a company. And we show up to the real world and we're like, hey, we're automating legal work with AI. And like nobody cared one bit, right? Like AI really wasn't like a thing in the like broader scheme of things. The technology honestly wasn't working, right? It was way pre-LLMs. And so it was all very clunky, very heavy, very complicated. And so we kind of like, we got into Y Combinator, we got a bunch of customers kind of like on a lots of like very individual use cases. There wasn't a lot of commonality. but like it was good enough to like help us survive for a couple of years. And then in 2020 we really figured out this like core product market fit around automating document related use cases for accounting teams. And there's like, if you're a big enterprise, right, your CrowdStrike or your DoorDash, you have huge teams of people that basically just read documents and tie out, all the information with your ERP and like write down accounting conclusions. And we figured out a way how to automate it. And that really like, we found this like kind of first product market fit, and that allowed us to scale to a decent scale. And signed a bunch of customers. We signed we went through Series A about a year in, and then Series B about 2 years later. And that really allowed us to scale. And as we were doing that, we realized we're running AI transformation projects for our customers. Right? They would hire us, and we would come in. We would understand the process. How does it work? So we would map out currently how does the process work. Then we would figure out how do we want to change it so we can automate it. Then we would actually automate it, and then we would like do change management, right? Like teach them how to do it differently, and kind of like teach them how to work with AI. And that was like the process around that, like that implementation was always the most painful part, the worst part of our business. And so we started building these like little agents and little tools that would help us, do it better. And then, we showed it to a couple of customers as like a preview of like, how are we thinking about streamlining implementation? And they were all like, can we buy that from you? This is incredible, right? Like this is something that we really want. And so then we launched it as a separate product, and now that's our core driver of the business. It very quickly grew, and it became bigger than the original business. That's still growing, and we're still supporting that. But this just like skyrocketed.
So I guess for the people that are listening to get it, what ended up the business model of Klarity? How are you guys making money? What's the business model?
Yeah, we're a enterprise subscription kind of a model, right? And so what we always do is like we figure out what's your scope, right? Maybe you want to solve finance transformation with AI, or you're doing HR transformation with AI, or you're doing sales operations, revenue operations, commercial operations. I just want to like grow faster, right? I want to compress revenue cycles. And so what we do is like, we say, okay, we want to understand your scope. Maybe you have 500 people in these teams, and then we can give you like a subscription, and then you're using the product as much as you want.
I mean, you guys started this thing about 8 years ago. 8 years ago, AI, I mean, ChatGPT was not even there, pretty much, at least not the way that everyone knows it, and, Anthropic and the other companies either. You guys were quite ahead of the curve. I think that also creates its complexities and challenges, because when you're too early, it's just hard to get that adoption. So how were you guys able to navigate those early years so that you could really wait for that wave to form, which is ultimately what's happening now? You're writing that better than anyone else.
No, you're exactly right. We actually started the company even before the All You Need Is Attention paper. That's like the intellectual basis for LLMs came out, like about 3 months before the paper went out. So like we were way too early. So there's two things, right? Like I think that every single company needs to constantly obsess about finding customers, right? We always had customers. Like we would always sell, and we would always kind of like, we would learn how to sell, we would learn how to support customers, we would learn how to drive real value. Even though that the first couple of years, the business looked much more like a consulting business than a product business, right? We would be solving kind of like, all kinds of different use cases. The one thing that really stuck with us was, and we read it like very early after we started the company, but we read this quote from, I don't remember even from whom it was, but it was this quote about like, every single day that you stay in business, your chances of succeeding grow exponentially, right? Because it's like the market, the preferences, everything is moving around you, technology is moving around you. And so the longer you stay in business, um, the higher chance of success you have. And I think that's kind of like that's very much something that we always like, kept in mind. And we would just always kind of like think about, okay, what's the next thing? How can you solve this problem? How can you move a little bit forward? Um, and eventually, kind of to your point, like the technology and the market kind of caught up. And then it was just like, okay, we know how to sell, we know how to talk about AI, we know how to build product that like the world's largest companies can rely on and trust. We know all of these different things, and just the kind of the market shifted around us, the technology shifted around us, and then it was just like, okay, now we just need to execute.
So, talk to us too about the journey of raising money. I mean, you guys have done it all, going through the accelerator, experience, raising money from like top high-profile investors, especially as a foreigner too, which is not easy, by the way. I'm a foreigner myself too, and know how that journey is of building your networks and being intentional about it. So, talk to us about how was that journey of raising, the money and going through the motions and such.
Yeah, the one really interesting pattern that I feel like is every round that you can think of, one is always really easy, the next one is really difficult, the next one is really easy, and the next one is really difficult. Right. So we first started the company, right? And this is like fall 2017. We just need to raise a little bit of like ramen money, basically, right? Just to like keep the business afloat and to pay rent. That was super easy. That was like that happened in like a matter of like 3 days. And we just had a deck, we had an idea, and that worked really well. Then we were like, okay, we want to get into Y Combinator. We wanted to move the company from Boston to Silicon Valley because we were like, all the stuff that's happening with AI is happening here, so we need to be here as well. And for YC, we actually applied 3 times. The first time we were rejected, the second time we were rejected, the third time we were re-interviewed, right? When they did one interview and they're like, we're not sure, like you guys made some progress, but we're not sure. Then they re-interviewed us and then they accepted us. So it was super hard. Then we did our seed round. We raised our seed round, like those, $2 million, so fairly small seed round. Back in 2018, that was a decently sized round. We raised that in like 24 hours. That was very easy because we signed a bunch of like big customers like Salesforce and so on. And it was like very, very, very easy to raise. And then we were just like treading for a couple of years. And then Series A was very difficult because nobody cared about AI in 2021. That was, pre AI, so nobody cared about that. And then our Series B were raised in 3 days. And so kind of like the big kind of like meta point is like what we learned about it is you need to have very strong traction, so good numbers. You need to have very clear story about something is like, okay, I understand what problem are you solving, what's unique about the way you're solving it, and by the way, and here's the traction, here are all the numbers. And then the third thing that we learned, and I hope that this is not disheartening to anybody, but it's like it's kind of random about what's the sentiment, because a lot of investors think about these like theses or like, okay, right now I'm investing in this specific type of vertical SaaS. Right now I'm investing in like context graph companies, which is what we do, which is like a really hot space right now, right? And so a lot of it is also about just like your timing and like, is it something that the investor is like thinking about, has a thesis, and is just evaluating is like, okay, is this a good company to put my bet on? Versus like, okay, I need to learn about the space. I need to kind of like grasp the market. And so I think those are the core 3 learnings.
And what about investor access? Because, when you come here, foreigner, immigrant, you don't know anybody, like how did you go about investor access, getting the right doors open?
I think there's a couple of things. So I think the first one is, and credit goes to Y Combinator here, right? Like we established a lot of our early network in the US through Y Combinator, where we met a bunch of like partners and so on. And kind of like it's the note, like you get that first person that you talk to, and then they introduce you to 3 others, right? And so on. And so I think like a lot of credit goes to Y Combinator. And then the second thing I think that is really important, and I think that's really unique, and that, as a foreigner, right, is that really draws me specifically to SF and Silicon Valley is like you're very much people look at you very much based on the merit that you have, right? Like, are you actually building something interesting? Are you actually getting traction? Are you getting enterprise customers that are, or in our case, enterprise customers? Are you getting customers? And this is like really unique about Silicon Valley, where you can get these meetings that I haven't even seen on the quite honestly even on the East Coast before.
So talk to us too about the vision, because obviously when you raise this money, you go through the motions. And just out of curiosity, just for everyone listening, what's the total amount raised to date?
92 million.
Now, obviously, investors bet on a vision.
Yeah.
Investors, customers, employees. Let's say you go to sleep tonight and you wake up in a world where the vision here is fully realized. What does that world look like?
What we basically do is like we help large companies, enterprises, adopt and get value out of AI, like through transformation, right? So if you think about kind of the problem statement that every single executive in a large company like Fortune 2000 is grappling with today, is how do I implement AI to actually meaningfully move my operating or financial metrics? How do I grow revenue faster? How do I cut costs? How do I speed up, accelerate my business, right? And we call this like 80-20 problem. The 20% of the solution has been like, okay, I'm going to buy ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini license, or whatever other AI tooling. But the really big part is like, how do you actually like do the change management around it? How do you teach people how to use these tools? So they're faster, they're better, they're able to perform the work in a faster, higher quality way. How do you redesign processes? Right? I was just talking to a customer yesterday, and they were saying it's like we had a process that took 60 days on average. We reimagined it with AI, with Klarity, and now it takes 3 days, right? It's like we completely, kind of collapsed the number of approvals and the execution, because you can generate a lot of these, these are specifically marketing assets that they're doing kind of very quickly, right? And so how do you redesign these processes that were built for a different world? How do you change roles and responsibilities of people? A lot of our customers are doing what we call, and we support them in this, like roll-ups. Now that you can do multiple different things, right? Like you can generate, for example, marketing content, or you can generate sales content and so on. Well, why do you need a sales enablement person? You have like what we call full stack account executive, right? And they own, building their own pipeline, because you don't need a business development representative, because like you can actually like do that with a series of agents. When you're selling, you can get much more support, because you don't need as much support, because the agent can generate like all kinds of different like assets and so on that you need. You can have AI reviewing and helping you guide in negotiations and contract negotiations as well. And what we basically do is like we take all this complexity around people, process, and kind of like individual use cases. But we rolled it up, but we have a series of agents that basically helps an enterprise executive get a lot of value. And so the world that we see is basically we help our customers build these like exponential organizations that are, people are happier to work there, they're more productive, they're moving faster, people get more satisfaction from their work.
That sounds like a beautiful world, Andrew. So we're talking about the future here. So I want to take a step back and talk about the past. Let's say I bring you back in time, let's say about 8 years ago, where you were there in Harvard, and let's say you're able to stop that younger self that is coming out with a business plan or with a pitch deck on his hands, and you're able to give that younger Andrew one piece of advice before launching a business. What would that be, and why now?
I think one is simplify, simplify, simplify. The best ideas, the most powerful ideas are like really simple and very straightforward, and you can explain them quickly. And I think like we overcomplicated things a lot. And then I think the second thing is, and you hinted at it earlier, which is every year I always like think about when I'm like, okay, what was the biggest thing that I've learned this last year? And what I always learn is that relationships matter and network matters. And every year I'm surprised how much more it matters than I thought the previous year, consistently since the start of the company. And so I would say simplify, 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 and then build relationships, strong relationships early.
For the people that are listening, Andrew, that would love to reach out and say hi and learn more as well, what's the best way for them to do so?
Absolutely. I'm Andrew at Klarity.ai. It's spelled with a K, so it's KLARITY.ai. And I'd love to chat.
Easy enough. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for being on the Deal Maker Show today. It has been an absolute honor to have you with us.
Thanks so much for having me, Alejandro. This was a lot of fun.